My name is Linda Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. 3 days ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen was watching my 7-year-old daughter Emma writhing in pain from what turned out to be appendicitis. I spent 72 hours in that sterile hospital, holding her hand through emergency surgery, maxing out my credit cards, and praying to anyone who would listen. When we finally came home this morning, Emma still pale and weak but alive, I thought we could breathe again. I was wrong. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally become your worst nightmare when you need them most. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to share will show you how blood doesn't always mean family, and sometimes the most important lesson comes from the darkest moments. The medical bills were stacked on my kitchen counter like a paper mountain of despair. $8,467 even after insurance coverage. I stared at those numbers until they blurred together, my coffee growing cold in my trembling hands. 3 months earlier, my ex-husband Michael had walked out with his 22-year-old secretary, leaving behind empty promises about child support that never materialized. The divorce papers were still fresh when his payments stopped completely, and my lawyer said getting blood from a stone would be easier than getting money from Michael. I had been working 2 jobs since the separation. Mornings at Mel's Diner on 5th Street, where I served coffee and eggs to construction workers who left dollar tips on $15 checks. Evenings at the Meridian office complex, where I emptied trash cans and scrubbed toilets until my knees ached and my hands cracked from industrial cleaning chemicals. 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and still barely making ends meet in our cramped 2-bedroom apartment on Elm Street. Emma had been my constant motivation through everything. When she complained about stomach pain last Tuesday during her second-grade class, the school nurse called me at the diner. I dropped everything my manager Janet shouting about responsibilities as I ran out the door. At Riverside General Emergency Room, Dr. Peterson's grave expression told me everything before he spoke the words. Emergency appendectomy. Tonight. No choice. Those 3 days blurred into an endless cycle of uncomfortable hospital chairs, stale vending machine sandwiches, and watching Emma sleep with tubes in her tiny arms. I called in sick to both jobs, knowing I couldn't afford to lose either one, but unable to leave my daughter's side. The nurses were kind, bringing me blankets and coffee, but their sympathy couldn't pay the bills that kept arriving via certified mail. When Emma's fever finally broke on Friday morning and Dr. Peterson said we could go home, I felt a surge of gratitude mixed with terror. My savings account showed $43.18. My checking account wasn't much better. The hospital payment plan required $400 monthly for the next 2 years, money I simply didn't have. But Emma was alive, recovering, and that had to be enough for now. Our apartment felt different when we walked through the door that morning. Smaller somehow, though nothing had changed. Emma went straight to her bedroom, still moving carefully around her stitches, and curled up with her favorite stuffed elephant. I made her favorite chicken soup, the kind from a can that she insisted tasted better than homemade, and tried to figure out how to make this work. The rent was due in 6 days, utilities in 10, and I had exactly enough money for either one, but not both. That's when I heard the familiar sound of my father's Cadillac pulling into the parking lot below our second-floor window. Patricia and Harold Thompson had money written in every detail of their appearance. My mother stepped out of the passenger seat, wearing a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her silver hair perfectly styled despite the October wind. My father emerged from the driver's side in his typical dark suit, the kind he wore to board meetings and country club dinners, his expression already set in disapproval. I hadn't seen them since Emma's birthday party 6 months ago, an awkward affair where they criticized everything from my grocery store cake to Emma's secondhand dress. Their visits were always unannounced, always felt like inspections rather than family time. But today, with medical bills crushing me and Emma recovering from surgery, maybe they had come to help. Maybe this time would be different. The knock on my door came exactly 3 minutes after I saw them park, as if they had timed it perfectly. I opened it to find my mother holding a small gift bag, and my father checking his expensive watch with obvious impatience. "Hello, Linda," Patricia said, stepping past me without invitation. "We heard about Emma's situation through your cousin Rebecca. Thought we should check on things." Harold followed his eyes, immediately scanning our living room with the same critical assessment he used in business negotiations. The mismatched furniture, the stack of bills on the coffee table, the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, everything seemed to register as evidence of my failures. "How is she?" Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she was fulfilling an obligation rather than expressing genuine concern. "Recovering well," I replied, gesturing toward Emma's room, where soft music played from her small radio. "The surgery went perfectly. She'll be back to school next week." "Good, good," Harold said, settling into my second-hand armchair like he was claiming territory. "Hospital bills must be substantial. Surgery isn't cheap these days." For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe they had come to help with the financial burden. Maybe they understood that I was drowning and needed their support. I had been too proud to ask, but if they were offering, "They are pretty overwhelming," I admitted, moving toward the kitchen. "Can I get you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." Patricia removed her coat and draped it over the back of my couch, her movements precise and deliberate. "Coffee would be fine. We need to discuss some important matters with you anyway." I busied myself in the kitchen, my hands shaking slightly as I prepared 3 cups. Through the thin walls, I could hear Emma coughing softly in her room, and I made a mental note to check her temperature again soon. The normalcy of serving coffee to my parents felt surreal after the chaos of the past few days. When I returned to the living room with a tray, Patricia was examining one of Emma's school photos on the side table, her expression unreadable. Harold had pulled out his leather portfolio and was reviewing some papers with obvious purpose. "She looks thin," Patricia commented, setting down the photo. "Are you feeding her properly?" "Of course I am," I replied, trying to keep the defensive edge out of my voice. "She lost weight in the hospital, but that's normal after surgery." Harold looked up from his papers. "This apartment seems smaller than I remembered. Rent must be reasonable at least." Something in his tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. "It's affordable," I said carefully. "Emma and I are comfortable here." Patricia accepted her coffee cup but didn't drink. Instead, she surveyed the room again, her gaze lingering on the visible wear in the carpet. The slight water stain on the ceiling from last winter's roof leak, the stack of Emma's library books on the floor. "Comfortable?" she repeated, as if testing the word. "I suppose that's one way to describe it." The hope I had felt was beginning to curdle into something else, something familiar and uncomfortable. This wasn't a supportive visit from concerned grandparents. This was something else entirely. Harold set his coffee cup down with deliberate precision and opened his leather portfolio fully. The papers inside were organized with the same meticulous attention to detail he brought to everything in his life, from business contracts to family relationships. My mother leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap, watching my face with the intensity of someone waiting for a specific reaction. "Linda," Harold began, his voice taking on the formal tone he used in business meetings. "Your mother and I have been discussing your situation, and we've come to a decision that we believe is in everyone's best interest." The words hit me like cold water. "My situation," Patricia's perfectly lipsticked mouth formed a thin line. "Don't pretend you don't know what we're talking about. You're barely keeping your head above water financially. You're working yourself to death at those menial jobs. And now this medical emergency has pushed you over the edge completely." "We've been patient," Harold continued, pulling out a manila folder. "We've watched you make poor decision after poor decision, hoping you'd come to your senses and ask for help properly. The divorce from Michael, insisting on keeping this apartment, refusing our advice about Emma's schooling. But this medical crisis has forced our hand." I felt my chest tightening, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean, forced your hand?" Harold opened the folder and removed several sheets of paper, spreading them on the coffee table like evidence in a trial. At the top of the first page, I could see letterhead from his attorney's office, but I couldn't make out the details from where I sat. "Your wedding 5 years ago," Patricia said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "The reception at the Riverside Country Club, the flowers, the photographer, the band, the open bar. $37,000 in total expenses." My blood turned to ice. "What about it?" "We paid for everything," Harold said, tapping the papers with his index finger. "At the time, we considered it an investment in your future happiness. We thought you and Michael would build a stable life together, give Emma the kind of upbringing she deserves." "You said it was a gift," I whispered, my mouth suddenly dry. "You insisted on the big wedding." "I wanted something simple, remember? You said it was important for the family image." Patricia laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "Gift, Linda, we're not running a charity. That money was always understood to be a loan, and now we need it back." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the arm of my chair, trying to process what they were saying. "A loan? You never said anything about repayment terms, interest, nothing. For 5 years, you've never mentioned this." "We didn't think we needed to spell it out," Harold said, his tone suggesting I was being deliberately obtuse. "You were family. We trusted you to do the right thing when the time came. Well, the time has come." $12,000, Patricia added, consulting one of the papers. "We're being generous considering depreciation and the fact that the marriage didn't work out as planned. We need this amount within 30 days, or we'll be forced to explore other options." 12,000, I repeated, my voice barely audible. "I just spent everything I had on Emma's surgery. I don't have $12,000. I don't have $1,200. Harold's expression didn't change. "That's unfortunate, but poor planning on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on ours. We have our own financial obligations to consider. Besides," Patricia added, setting down her untouched coffee, "there are alternatives if you can't manage the lump sum. You could move back home with us. Emma would benefit from a stable environment, proper supervision, while you get your finances in order." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Move back to their house with their rules, their constant criticism, their need to control every aspect of my life and Emma's. I thought of my daughter finally feeling safe and loved in our small apartment and felt a surge of protective anger. "Emma and I are fine here," I said firmly. "This is our home." "Pippa," Patricia gestured around the room with obvious disdain. "This is barely adequate housing, Linda. Emma deserves better than secondhand furniture and library books. She deserves private school music lessons, the advantages we can provide." "She has advantages," I shot back, my composure finally cracking. "She has a mother who loves her unconditionally, who works hard to provide for her, who puts her needs first, always." Harold's face darkened. "A mother who can't afford proper medical care without going into debt. A mother who works at a diner and cleans offices for a living. Is that really the example you want to set?" The cruelty in his words took my breath away. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to support me through difficult times, not kick me when I was already down. But I was beginning to understand that this visit had nothing to do with concern for Emma or me. This was about control, about proving that I couldn't manage without their interference. "I think you should leave," I said quietly, standing up on unsteady legs. "Emma needs to rest, and this conversation is over." Patricia remained seated, her expression hardening. "This conversation is far from over, young lady. We didn't drive across town to be dismissed like servants." "You'll find the money," Harold said, gathering his papers but leaving the folder on my coffee table like a threat. "One way or another, you'll find it. Because if you don't, we'll be forced to take more drastic measures." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Patricia said, finally standing and reaching for her coat, "that we won't stand by and watch our granddaughter suffer because of your pride and poor judgment. There are legal options available to grandparents who are concerned about a child's welfare." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. They were talking about custody, about using their money and connections to take Emma away from me. The realization made my knees weak, but I forced myself to remain standing. "Get out," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Get out of my home right now. But they weren't finished with me yet. Harold rose from the chair slowly, deliberately, his 6-foot frame towering over me in the cramped living room. The casual businessman facade was melting away, revealing something harder and more dangerous underneath. Patricia moved to stand beside him, and together they formed an intimidating wall of parental authority and financial power. Sit down, Linda, Harold commanded, his voice dropping to the tone he used with employees who had disappointed him. We're not finished discussing this matter. Yes, we are, I replied, moving toward the front door. I want you both to leave. Now. Patricia's laugh was sharp and cutting. You want... She shook her head in mock amazement. You're 28 years old, Linda not 18. It's time you learned that what you want is irrelevant when you can't afford it. I reached for the door handle, but Harold's voice stopped me cold. Social services takes a very dim view of parents who can't provide stable housing and adequate medical care for their children, he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Especially single mothers with no family support system. You wouldn't dare, I whispered, turning to face them. Wouldn't we? Patricia moved closer, her expensive perfume overwhelming in the small space. We've been watching you struggle for years, Linda. The divorce, the financial problems, working multiple jobs, and leaving Emma with babysitters half the time. Do you really think a judge would side with you over us? Emma is happy here. She's healthy. She's loved. She just had emergency surgery that her mother couldn't afford, Harold interrupted. She's living in substandard housing, eating cheap food, wearing secondhand clothes. What judge is going to think that's better than a stable home with grandparents who can provide everything she needs? The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in. Everything they were saying was technically true, but they were twisting it, making my love for Emma and my efforts to provide for her sound like neglect and irresponsibility. You can't just take her away from me, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. We don't want to, Patricia said, but her tone suggested otherwise. We want what's best for Emma. If that means she lives with us while you get your life sorted out, then that's what we'll do. How long have you been planning this? The question escaped before I could stop it. Harold and Patricia exchanged a look that confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't a spontaneous reaction to Emma's medical emergency. They had been waiting for me to fail, positioning themselves to swoop in and take control. We've been concerned for some time, Harold admitted. Your insistence on independence, your refusal to accept help, your poor choice in husbands. We hoped you'd mature eventually, but recent events have convinced us that intervention is necessary. Intervention. I felt like I was drowning in their words. Their certainty, their absolute conviction that they knew what was best for my life and my daughter's future. Move in with us, Patricia said, her voice taking on a falsely reasonable tone. Temporarily, of course, just until you can pay off your debts and establish better financial stability. Emma can have her own room, attend proper schools, have advantages you simply can't provide. And what would be my role in this arrangement? You'd be our daughter again, Harold said, as if this was a generous offer. We'd help you find appropriate employment, something more suitable than food service and janitorial work. You could go back to school, perhaps get a degree in something practical. The picture they were painting sounded like a prison sentence. I would be under their roof, under their rules, watched and judged and controlled every moment of every day. Emma would be raised according to their values, their expectations, their vision of what a proper young lady should be. What if I refuse? Patricia's mask slipped, completely revealing the cold calculation underneath. Then we'll file for emergency custody based on your inability to provide adequate care. We'll present evidence of financial instability, unsuitable living conditions, and medical neglect. Medical neglect? I got her the surgery she needed. After a delay that could have been life-threatening, Harold said smoothly. If she had been living with us, she would have had immediate access to the best medical care available. I realized with crystal clarity that they had been building this case against me for months, maybe years. Every visit, every criticism, Every expression of concern had been ammunition gathering for this moment. They hadn't come to help me through a crisis. They had come to exploit it. "I won't let you do this," I said, my voice growing stronger with determination. "Emma belongs with me. Emma belongs with people who can actually take care of her." Patricia snapped, her patience finally exhausted. "People who don't live paycheck to paycheck in cheap apartments working degrading jobs." "There's nothing degrading about honest work," I shot back. "At least I earn my money instead of using it as a weapon against my own family." Harold's face turned red with anger. "How dare you speak to us that way, after everything we've done for you, every opportunity we've given you that you've thrown away?" "What opportunities? You've never supported anything I've wanted to do. You hated Michael from the beginning. You criticized my career choices. You've made it clear that nothing I do will ever be good enough for you. Because you keep making terrible decisions." Patricia's voice rose to a near shout. "And now your poor judgment is affecting our granddaughter. We won't stand for it anymore." That's when I heard the soft sound of a bedroom door opening, followed by small footsteps in the hallway. My heart sank as I realized Emma had been awakened by the arguing. Emma appeared in the doorway wearing her favorite purple pajamas, the ones with tiny stars that I had bought her for Christmas last year. Her brown hair was tangled from sleep, and her face was still pale from the surgery, but her eyes were alert and frightened. She was clutching her stuffed elephant against her chest like a shield. "Mommy," she said in a small voice, looking between me and my parents with obvious confusion. "Why is everyone yelling?" I immediately moved toward her, my maternal instincts overriding everything else. "Hey, sweetheart, you should be resting. Go back to bed and I'll be in to check on you in just a minute." But Emma stayed in the doorway, her intelligent 7-year-old mind clearly processing the tension in the room. "Grandma Patricia, Grandpa Harold, why are you here?" Patricia's entire demeanor changed instantly. Her face softened into the expression she reserved for Emma, and she moved toward my daughter with outstretched arms. "Hello, darling. We came to see how you're feeling after your surgery." Emma looked uncertain but didn't move toward her grandmother. Instead, she stayed close to the doorway, as if sensing the undercurrents of conflict she couldn't fully understand. "I'm okay," Emma said quietly. "My tummy still hurts a little, but Mommy takes good care of me." "Of course she does," Harold said, but I caught the meaningful look he exchanged with Patricia. Even this innocent conversation was being catalogued as evidence somehow. "Emma, please go back to your room," I said more firmly. "The adults need to finish talking." "But I heard shouting," Emma said, her voice getting smaller. "Are you mad at Mommy, Grandma?" Patricia knelt down to Emma's eye level, her voice taking on the syrupy sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Oh no, sweetheart. We're just worried about you and your mommy. We want to make sure you have everything you need to get better." "I have everything I need," Emma said with the simple certainty of childhood. "I have Mommy and Mr. Patches." She held up her stuffed elephant, and my own room, and my favorite soup. "But wouldn't you like to have more?" Patricia continued, ignoring the warning look I was giving her. "A bigger room, maybe? With all new toys and a computer for schoolwork?" Emma looked confused. "I like my room, and Mommy says we don't need lots of toys to be happy." I could see where this was heading, and I stepped forward to intervene. "Emma, honey, please go to your room. Now." But Harold had other ideas. "Linda, there's no need to shelter her from this conversation. Emma is old enough to understand what's being offered." "She's 7 years old," I said through gritted teeth. "And she just had surgery. She doesn't need to be involved in adult decisions." "She's the center of this decision," Patricia said, standing back up but keeping her hand on Emma's shoulder. "Emma, how would you feel about coming to stay with Grandpa and me for a while? We have that big house with the swimming pool and the library." "Patricia, stop," I said sharply, moving toward Emma. "You have no right to confuse her like this." "We have every right to offer our granddaughter a better life," Harold said, his voice rising again, "especially when her current situation is clearly inadequate." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I don't understand. What's wrong with our house? Did I do something bad? The sight of my daughter's confusion and fear ignited something fierce and protective in my chest. These people were using a sick child as a pawn in their power game, and I was done pretending this was a normal family disagreement. "You're leaving," I said, moving between Emma and my parents. "Right now. This conversation is over." "No, it isn't," Harold said, his own anger finally breaking through his controlled facade. "You're going to listen to Reason Linda whether you like it or not." "I've heard enough. Get out of my home." "This isn't over," Patricia warned, reaching for her purse. "We gave you a chance to handle this reasonably, but you're being stubborn and selfish as always." "I'm being a mother," I shot back. "Something you never learned how to be." The words hung in the air like a slap. Patricia's face went white with rage, and Harold took a step toward me, his hands clenched into fists. "How dare you?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "After everything we've sacrificed for you, every opportunity we've given you, this is how you repay us." "What sacrifices?" "You mean the control, the criticism, the constant message that nothing I do is good enough." "We tried to guide you," Patricia said, her voice shaking with fury. "We tried to save you from your own poor judgment, but you're determined to drag yourself and Emma down with your pride." "My pride?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean my refusal to let you run my life anymore?" Emma was crying now, still clutching her elephant and looking back and forth between us with growing distress. "Please stop fighting," she said in a small voice. "Please don't be mad." I knelt down beside her, trying to block out my parents' presence. "It's okay, baby. Sometimes adults disagree, but it has nothing to do with you. You didn't do anything wrong. But why don't Grandma and Grandpa want us to live here anymore?" Before I could answer, Harold spoke up. "Because you deserve better, Emma. You deserve a stable home where you don't have to worry about money or whether the lights will get turned off." I stood up so fast my vision blurred. The lights have never been turned off. I have never let Emma go without anything she truly needs. "Yet," Patricia added coldly, "you haven't failed yet. But it's only a matter of time." "Get out," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Get out of my house right now, or I'm calling the police." Harold laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The police? For what? Visiting our granddaughter and expressing concern for her welfare. For harassment. For threatening to take my child away from me." "We haven't threatened anything," Patricia said smoothly. "We've simply explained the reality of your situation and offered alternatives." I moved toward the phone on the kitchen counter, but Harold stepped into my path. We stood there for a moment staring at each other, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Real hatred. Not disappointment or frustration, but genuine hatred for the daughter who had refused to live according to his rules. "You always were ungrateful," he said quietly. "Even as a child, you questioned everything, challenged every decision, acted like you knew better than the people who loved you." "You don't love me," I said with sudden clarity. "You love the idea of controlling me. There's a difference." That's when Harold's control finally snapped completely. "You want to see what happens to ungrateful daughters," he said, raising his hand. "Maybe it's time you learned some respect." And before I could react, before I could move or speak or protect myself, his palm connected with my face with a crack that echoed through the small apartment like a gunshot. The force of the slap sent me stumbling backward, my cheek exploding in pain and my vision blurring with shock and tears. I caught my hip on the edge of the coffee table, lost my balance completely, and went down hard. The corner of the table caught my forehead as I fell, and I felt the sharp sting of skin splitting open. I hit the floor with a sickening thud, my head striking the thin carpet with enough force to make stars burst behind my eyelids. Warm blood began trickling down my face from the cut on my forehead, and the metallic taste of it reached my lips as I lay there stunned and disoriented. "Mom!" Emma's scream cut through the ringing in my ears like a knife. "Mommy!" Through my dazed vision, I could see my daughter rushing toward me, her stuffed elephant forgotten on the floor. She dropped to her knees beside me. her small hands hovering over my bleeding face as if she wanted to help but didn't know how. "Mommy, are you okay? Please be okay," she sobbed, her tears falling onto my shoulder as she leaned over me. I tried to sit up, my head spinning and my cheek throbbing, but I managed to focus on Emma's terrified face. "I'm okay, baby," I whispered, though blood was still flowing from the cut on my forehead. "I'm okay." Harold stood over us both, his hands still raised slightly, breathing hard from the exertion and emotion. There was no remorse in his expression, no shock at what he had done. Instead, he looked satisfied, as if he had finally found an effective way to make his point. "Maybe now you'll obey," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "Maybe now you'll understand that we're serious about this." Emma looked up at him with complete bewilderment and fear. "Grandpa Harold, why did you hurt my mommy?" Patricia moved to stand beside her husband, looking down at me with an expression of distaste rather than concern. "Your mother needs to learn that actions have consequences, Emma. When someone is disrespectful and ungrateful, sometimes they need to be reminded of their place." "But hitting is wrong," Emma said, her voice quavering. "We learned about it in school. Nobody should hit anybody." "Sometimes," Harold said, adjusting his tie as if nothing unusual had happened, "adults have to make difficult decisions to protect the people they love." I managed to push myself up to a sitting position, one hand pressed against the cut on my forehead to stem the bleeding. The room tilted around me, but fury was beginning to burn through the shock and pain. These people had just committed assault in front of my child, and they were trying to justify it as love. "You hit me," I said, my voice thick with blood and disbelief. "You actually hit me in front of Emma." "You forced my hand," Harold replied, matter-of-factly. "Your disrespect and ingratitude left me no choice." "Get away from us," I said, struggling to my feet with Emma's help. "Both of you get away from my daughter right now." But Patricia wasn't finished. "This is exactly what we're talking about, Linda. This kind of drama, this instability. Do you really think this is the environment Emma should be growing up in? You created this drama," I shot back, pressing a dish towel to my bleeding forehead. "You came into my home, threatened to take my child, and then assaulted me when I refused to obey you." "We came here offering help and reasonable solutions," Harold said, his breathing returning to normal, as if violence was just another negotiation tactic. "You chose to respond with hostility and disrespect." Emma was clinging to my leg, staring up at her grandparents with an expression I had never seen before. The innocence was gone from her eyes, replaced by a hard understanding that some adults couldn't be trusted, that some people would hurt you even when they claimed to love you. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice growing stronger despite the pain. "I want you out of this apartment and out of our lives." "That's not your decision to make anymore," Patricia said, reaching for her purse. "Not after this display." Emma witnessed her mother being violent and disrespectful to her elders. That's something family services will be very interested to hear about. "I wasn't violent. You attacked me." "I defended myself against your aggressive behavior," Harold said smoothly, and I realized he was already crafting the story he would tell to authorities. "You became physical first." "That's a lie." "Emma," Patricia said, kneeling down to my daughter's level again. "You saw what happened, didn't you? You saw your mother being mean to Grandpa Harold?" Emma looked between them and me, confusion and fear warring in her young face. "I saw Grandpa Harold hit Mommy," she said quietly but clearly. "Mommy didn't hit anybody." Patricia's expression darkened. "Sometimes when people are upset, they don't remember things correctly, sweetheart. Adults understand things that children can't." "I remember it right," Emma said, her voice getting stronger. "Grandpa Harold hit Mommy, and it was wrong." I felt a surge of pride in my daughter's courage, even as I realized that her honesty was probably making our situation worse. Harold and Patricia exchanged another look, and I could see them calculating how to handle this unexpected resistance. "Emma is obviously traumatized by this incident," Harold said. "She needs counseling and a stable environment to recover from witnessing such violence." The only violence she witnessed was from you, I said, helping Emma step behind me so I could shield her from their presence. That's not how it will look to the authorities, Patricia said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. A single mother living in poverty, unable to afford medical care, getting into physical altercations with family members who are trying to help. Emma deserves better than this chaos. I realized with growing horror that they had planned this entire scenario. The impossible financial demand, the custody threats, even the physical violence was all calculated to create a situation they could use against me. They weren't trying to help Emma. They were trying to take her. You won't get away with this, I said, moving toward the phone again. I'm calling the police right now. Go ahead, Harold said casually. Tell them about the assault. Tell them about your financial problems, your inability to provide adequate housing and medical care for your daughter. Tell them about the family that's trying to offer a solution. Tell them about the grandparents who have money and stability and a genuine concern for their granddaughter's welfare, Patricia added. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing all sides of the story. They were right, and we all knew it. With their money, their lawyers, their ability to present themselves as concerned grandparents trying to save a child from an unfit mother, they could make this situation look very different from the truth. But as I stood there bleeding with Emma's small hand gripping mine, I realized something important. I had been afraid of them my entire life, afraid of disappointing them, afraid of their disapproval, afraid of losing their conditional love. But there was something I was more afraid of losing Emma. And that fear was going to make me stronger than I had ever been before. I picked up the phone with my free hand, never taking my eyes off my parents as I dialed 911. The cut on my forehead was still bleeding, sending red drops onto the carpet, but my hand was steady as I held the receiver. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report a domestic assault, I said clearly loud enough for Harold and Patricia to hear every word. A man struck me in my apartment and I'm bleeding. I need police and medical assistance. Harold's confident expression faltered slightly. Linda, don't be ridiculous. You're turning a family disagreement into something it isn't. I ignored him completely. My 7-year-old daughter witnessed the assault, I continued to the dispatcher. I need them removed from my home immediately. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? Are the perpetrators still present? Yes, they're still here, and yes, I feel threatened. They've made statements about taking my child away from me. Patricia moved toward the door, her composed mask finally slipping. Harold, we should go. This is getting out of hand. But Harold wasn't ready to retreat. You're making a huge mistake, Linda. When the police get here, they're going to see an unstable single mother who can't handle a simple family discussion without calling for help. This will only support our case. What case? The dispatcher asked, having overheard. Ma'am, can you clarify the nature of the threats being made? They're threatening to take custody of my daughter, I said, keeping my voice calm and factual. They've made financial demands I can't meet, and said they'll file for emergency custody if I don't comply. When I asked them to leave, the man assaulted me. Emma was still pressed against my leg, but she had stopped crying. Instead, she was watching everything with the intense focus of a child who was learning important lessons about standing up to bullies, even when those bullies were family. Units are en route, the dispatcher said. Can you safely separate yourself from the individuals making threats? They're by the front door. My daughter and I are in the kitchen area. Harold's face was getting redder by the minute. You have no idea what you're doing, Linda. Do you think involving the police is going to make you look like a fit mother? Do you think this kind of drama is good for Emma? I think protecting my daughter from people who would hurt her mother in front of her is exactly what a fit mother should do, I replied, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. Patricia was putting on her coat with sharp, angry movements. This isn't over. You can't hide behind the police forever. Emma still deserves better than this. Emma deserves to be safe, I said firmly. She deserves to live without fear, without people who claim to love her using violence to get their way. The sound of sirens was growing louder outside our window. Within minutes, there would be police officers in my apartment taking statements, asking questions, creating an official record of what had happened here today. "Mommy," Emma said quietly, "are the police coming to help us?" "Yes, sweetheart. They're coming to make sure we're safe." "Will they make Grandpa Harold and Grandma Patricia go away?" "They'll make sure no one hurts us," I said, choosing my words carefully. Harold heard the exchange and his expression turned calculating again. "Emma, don't you want to come live with us? Wouldn't you like to have your own swimming pool and a pony?" Before I could intervene, Emma looked up at him with the devastating honesty that only children possess. "I don't want to live with people who hit my mommy," she said clearly. "That's not safe." The sirens were right outside now, and I could see flashing lights through our window. Harold and Patricia exchanged one last look before Patricia opened the front door. "We'll be in touch through our lawyer," she said coldly. "This conversation is far from over." "Yes, it is," I replied. "Any further contact goes through my attorney." As if I had an attorney. As if I could afford an attorney. But they didn't need to know that right now. The police knocked on the door just as Patricia was trying to leave, and suddenly my small apartment was full of uniformed officers asking questions, taking photos of my injuries, and listening to 3 very different versions of what had happened. Officer Martinez, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, took my statement while her partner spoke with Harold and Patricia in the hallway. Emma sat beside me on the couch, holding my hand and occasionally adding details that the adults had gotten wrong. "He hit Mommy really hard," she told Officer Martinez. "And then he said maybe now she would obey. That's not nice to say." "No, it isn't," Officer Martinez agreed, making notes in her report. "Emma, has anyone ever hit your mommy before?" Emma shook her head. "Mommy doesn't let people be mean to us. She works really hard to take care of me." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but they weren't tears of pain anymore. They were tears of pride in my brave, honest daughter who refused to be intimidated even by her own grandparents. Officer Martinez's partner returned with a grim expression. "Ma'am, the individuals claim this was a family dispute that got out of hand. They're saying you were the aggressor and that the man was defending himself." "That's not true," Emma said immediately. "Grandpa Harold hit Mommy first. I saw it. I understand there are ongoing custody concerns," Officer Martinez said carefully. "Can you tell me about that?" I explained about the surprise financial demands, the threats to take Emma, the implications that I was an unfit mother. As I spoke, I could see the officers beginning to understand that this wasn't a simple family argument, but something more complex and potentially dangerous. "Are you interested in pursuing charges for the assault?" Officer Martinez asked. I looked at Emma, then back at the officer. 6 months ago, I would have been too afraid of my parents' retaliation to take such a step. But something had changed in me today. Watching Emma's courage, seeing her refuse to accept that violence was normal or acceptable, had shown me what real strength looked like. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want to press charges." Harold's voice carried from the hallway, and I could hear him arguing with the other officer about his rights, his standing in the community, the misunderstanding that had led to this situation. But his words sounded hollow now, like the complaints of a bully who had finally been called to account. Officer Martinez handed me her card. "You'll need to come to the station tomorrow to sign the formal complaint. In the meantime, if they contact you directly or come back here, call us immediately." "What about their threats regarding custody?" "That's a civil matter, but this assault charge will definitely be relevant if they try to claim you're an unfit parent. Document everything. Get copies of all medical records and consider consulting with a family law attorney." After the police left with Harold and Patricia, Emma and I sat together on the couch in the sudden quiet of our apartment. The coffee cups were still on the table. The folder of legal papers was still spread out like evidence of my parents' intentions. But something fundamental had changed. "Mommy," Emma said, leaning against my shoulder, "are we going to be okay?" I looked around our small, humble apartment at the secondhand furniture and the stack of medical bills, at the evidence of our modest but loving life together. 6 hours ago, I had been terrified that I couldn't provide enough for Emma, that maybe my parents were right about her deserving better. Now I understood that what Emma deserved most was a mother who would protect her, who would stand up to anyone who tried to hurt or frighten her, who would choose love over fear every single time. Yes, sweetheart, I said, holding her close. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be free. The next 6 months became a masterclass in discovering my own strength. The morning after the assault, I woke up with a black eye and a bandaged forehead, but also with a clarity I had never experienced before. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't afraid of my parents' disapproval or worried about meeting their impossible standards. I started by doing exactly what Officer Martinez had suggested. I documented everything meticulously, recording every interaction, every threat, every attempt at contact. Harold and Patricia hired a lawyer within a week, sending official letters demanding visitation rights and threatening custody proceedings. But I had something they hadn't counted on: Emma's unwavering testimony about what she had witnessed, and a police report that painted a very different picture than the one they were trying to sell. The assault charge moved through the legal system slowly but steadily. Harold's expensive attorney tried to get it dismissed, claiming it was a family matter blown out of proportion. But Emma's statement and the photographic evidence of my injuries made that impossible. The case was scheduled for trial in 8 months. More importantly, I found legal help of my own. Sarah Chen, a family law attorney who specialized in domestic violence cases, agreed to take my case on a sliding scale payment plan after hearing the details. She was appalled by my parents' financial manipulation and assured me that their so-called loan had no legal standing whatsoever. Wedding expenses paid by parents are considered gifts unless there's a written agreement stating otherwise, she explained during our first meeting. They can't retroactively decide it was a loan just because they want to control you. With Sarah's help, I filed for a restraining order that prevented Harold and Patricia from contacting Emma or me directly. They were allowed to send communications through their attorney, but no more surprise visits, no more threatening phone calls, no more attempts to manipulate Emma with promises of ponies and swimming pools. The restraining order seemed to break something in them. Within a month, I learned through my cousin Rebecca that Harold and Patricia were telling everyone who would listen that I had become violent and unstable, that they were heartbroken about being cut off from their granddaughter, that they were only trying to help when I attacked them. But their version of events became harder to maintain when the assault charge became public record. My job situation improved dramatically once I wasn't living in constant fear. Janet at the diner, who had seemed annoyed when I left for Emma's emergency, became surprisingly supportive when she learned what had happened. She promoted me to shift supervisor, which came with a small raise and better hours. I was able to quit the evening cleaning job and spend more time with Emma, helping her process what she had witnessed and ensuring she felt safe and secure. Emma amazed me throughout this entire process. Rather than being traumatized by seeing her mother assaulted, she seemed empowered by watching me fight back. She started standing up to a bully at school who had been taking her lunch money, and when her teacher asked what had changed, Emma said simply, "My mom taught me that we don't let people hurt us, even if they say they love us." The medical bills that had seemed so insurmountable became manageable with the payment plan and my increased income. I also discovered that Emma qualified for a state health insurance program that covered children and families with limited income, something I had been too proud to investigate before. Most surprising of all, I started dating again. Marcus, a regular customer at the diner, who had always been friendly and respectful, asked me out about 4 months after the incident with my parents. I was terrified at first, worried that I couldn't trust my judgment about people, but Emma liked him immediately. "He's nice to you, Mommy," she said after Marcus had taken us both to the zoo one Saturday. "He doesn't try to make you different." That simple observation captured what I was learning about healthy relationships. Marcus never criticized my apartment, my job, or my parenting choices. He celebrated my strength rather than trying to control it, and he treated Emma like a beloved bonus rather than an obstacle to our relationship. Harold's trial was scheduled for a Tuesday in February. The night before, I lay awake wondering if I was doing the right thing by pursuing it. Part of me worried that Emma would be traumatized by testifying that maybe it would be better to just let it go and move on with our lives. But when I mentioned my concerns to Emma over breakfast, she set me straight with the wisdom that children sometimes possess in abundance. "Mommy," she said carefully, spreading jam on her toast, "if Grandpa Harold doesn't get in trouble for hitting you, won't he think it's okay to hit other people?" She was right, of course. This wasn't just about protecting ourselves anymore. It was about standing up to bullies everywhere, about teaching Emma that violence was never acceptable, about ensuring that Harold faced consequences for his actions. The trial itself was brief and decisive. Harold's attorney tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter who had provoked the assault, but Emma's testimony was devastating to their case. When asked to describe what she had seen, she spoke clearly and without hesitation. "Grandpa Harold hit my mommy really hard," she said, her small voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "She fell down and was bleeding. Then he said maybe now she would obey. That scared me because it sounded like he wanted to hurt her more." Harold was convicted of simple assault and sentenced to anger management classes, community service, and 2 years of probation. More importantly, the conviction made their custody threats legally meaningless. No judge would award custody to grandparents with domestic violence convictions, especially against the child's mother. Patricia filed one last desperate motion 6 months later, claiming that I was alienating Emma from her grandparents and denying important family relationships. But Emma, now 8 years old, and more confident than ever, wrote a letter to the judge explaining that she didn't want to visit people who had hurt her mother and made her feel unsafe. The motion was denied, and Sarah advised me that it would likely be the last legal challenge from my parents. They were running out of money, fighting losing battles, and their reputation in their social circle had been damaged by the assault conviction. Today marks 1 year since my parents showed up at my apartment demanding money I didn't owe and threatening to take away the most important thing in my life. As I write this, Emma is in her room doing homework, occasionally calling out math questions that I help her solve from the kitchen where I'm preparing our dinner. Our life looks very different now, though. Our apartment is the same. The medical bills are nearly paid off thanks to steady payments and my promotion to assistant manager at the diner. Emma is thriving in school, confident and happy with friends who come over for sleepovers and birthday parties. Marcus is a regular part of our lives now, and Emma has started asking when we might get married, though she assures me she's in no hurry, as long as he keeps making his famous chocolate chip pancakes on Sunday mornings. The most significant change isn't in our circumstances, though. It's in me. I no longer wake up afraid of phone calls or unexpected visitors. I no longer second-guess every decision I make about Emma's care or our life together. I've learned that being a good mother isn't about having unlimited resources or a perfect house or wealthy relatives who approve of your choices. Being a good mother means protecting your child from people who would harm them, even when those people are family. It means teaching them that love doesn't require submission, that respect must be mutual, and that they never have to accept abuse from anyone regardless of the relationship. Emma learned these lessons watching me stand up to my parents, but I learned them from her. Her courage in telling the truth, her refusal to accept that violence was normal, her simple statement that she didn't want to live with people who hurt her mother, all of these things showed me what real strength looked like. I think about Harold and Patricia sometimes wondering if they ever understood what they lost when they chose control over love. They could have been part of Emma's life, watching her grow up, celebrating her achievements, being the kind of grandparents who add joy and security to a child's world. Instead, they're strangers now, people we avoid at family gatherings, names that make Emma's face close up with remembered fear. Their choice, not mine. Their loss, not ours. The hardest lesson I learned was that family isn't automatic. Being related by blood doesn't guarantee love, loyalty, or even basic decency. Some people will use family relationships as weapons, claiming authority over your life, simply because they share your DNA. But real family, the kind that matters, is built on mutual respect, unconditional love, and the willingness to protect each other from harm. Emma and I are family. Marcus is becoming family. My friend Sarah, who helped me find legal representation, is family. The neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, who watches Emma when I work late shifts, is family. These people choose to be in our lives, and we choose to be in theirs, creating bonds based on love rather than obligation. I don't hate my parents, which sometimes surprises people who know our story. Hate requires too much energy, and I need all my energy for building the life Emma deserves. Instead, I feel something closer to pity. They're trapped in their need to control others, unable to experience the joy that comes from loving someone unconditionally. Emma sometimes asks if we'll ever see Grandpa Harold and Grandma Patricia again. I tell her honestly that I don't know, but that if we do, it will only be when she's old enough to make that choice for herself, and only if they've learned to treat people with respect. "Do you think they miss us?" she asked recently. "I think they miss the idea of us," I replied. "They miss having people they could control. But I don't think they ever really knew us well enough to miss who we actually are." She nodded thoughtfully, then went back to her coloring book, apparently satisfied with that explanation. The truth is, I don't spend much time thinking about my parents anymore. I'm too busy living the life they tried to convince me I wasn't capable of managing. Emma and I aren't rich, but we're secure. We're not living in a mansion, but our home is filled with laughter and love. I'm not married to a man who fits their social expectations, but I'm building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Most importantly, Emma is growing up knowing that she's worthy of love simply because she exists, not because she meets someone else's standards or expectations. She's learning that her voice matters, that her feelings are valid, and that she never has to accept mistreatment from anyone. These are lessons I wish I had learned at her age, but learning them now as an adult has allowed me to break a cycle of control and manipulation that might have continued for another generation. 6 months ago, Emma came home from school, excited about a project she was working on. "We have to write about our hero," she announced, "someone who showed courage and made things better." I suggested she write about firefighters or doctors or teachers, but she shook her head. "I want to write about you, Mommy. You stood up to the bullies and kept me safe." Reading her essay later that night with its 7-year-old spelling and earnest descriptions of how her mother was brave when mean people tried to hurt them, I finally understood something important. I had spent so many years feeling like a failure because I couldn't meet my parents' impossible standards. But Emma saw me clearly as someone who would fight for her, protect her, and choose her well-being over anyone else's approval. That's the only standard that matters. If you've made it this far in my story, I hope you'll take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself or your children? How did you find the courage to stand up to people who claim to love you while treating you badly? Your experiences might help someone else who's facing similar challenges. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to walk away from toxic family members, even parents, when staying means accepting abuse. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve to be treated with love and respect by everyone in your life, especially the people who claim to care about you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept anything less. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you in the next video.